All right. Welcome to the Unfazed, Unedited podcast, where we provide commentary on complicated topics in an uncomplicated format. I'm Dr. Shaunna Payne Gold, and I go by she, her, hers pronouns. And Dr. Lisa, you have to tell me about your weather because once again, we have another podcast and I got wind just swirling and swirling all around me. So hopefully we'll hang in there.
Yes, well, hopefully, nothing gets knocked out on your side of things. Hi, everyone. My pronouns are she, her. We are springing. Spring has sprung. Sprung has spring. Yes, it's all been very spring-like. I do not believe
Oh,
that we are fully out of the woods yet because we have
exactly. Yeah.
gotten snows into May before. So, but
Mm.
I'm feeling good about the weather these days. No wind. Although yesterday we did have 20-mile-an-hour winds, so maybe I sent that your way.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, because I got branches all around in my yard and I got a little work to do here. But anyway, good to be back on with you as we never have a shortage of topics to talk
Nope,
about.
not at all.
Oh, goodness. And so we're going to dive right in with actually, instead of a word of the week, Lisa, this is very much a concept of the week that is. Oh, how can we say? It's very prevalent to where we are here in
Mm-hmm.
the United States because people are having to make tough decisions around language choices. So the Trump administration has been very quickly and covertly, in many ways, making certain words disappear. And so you have heard Lisa and I talk more than once about how words matter. Words matter. And so excluding particular words that we talk about all the time on this podcast, like
Mm-hmm.
advocacy, allyship, anti-racism, bias, we've certainly talked about climate change, BIPOC communities, anything with culture in it, anything with diverse in it, anything with inclusive in it. Oh Lord, it's just, just I'm torn, Lisa, because as this is a concept, I wish it weren't a concept that we're having to bring up at the moment. But what I think is really interesting is that I'm collaborating on a seminar that's about inclusive coaching. And I'm responsible for the first couple of sessions. And those first couple of sessions are around language. In fact, defining the language and thinking about being intentional on usage. And so there was a question that speaks to this very concept of what should we use when in this particular climate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I'm like, well, shoot, what do I tell people? Because it kind of feels like one group, in order to keep their organizations and businesses alive, will have to somewhat bend a knee in order to continue the larger work while not getting caught up on semantics that we think are very important. And I realize that has to be a decision for some. We have others that can pick and choose, like probably like ourselves, Lisa, where in some states that we do work, we can continue like we always have. In other states, we have to make decisions whether we want to work with them or not. And then you got other folks that are activists that are going to continue to speak truth to power to all the language that has been listed as unsavory language by the current administration. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's a matter of how
Mm-hmm.
you make those decisions, Lisa. But what do you think about this concept and us having to think even more deeply about our intentionality here?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to get a sense of this ever growing list of words that are threatened or have been outright banned, the New York Times a few weeks ago published the list, and I'm sure it has since grown and changed. And to be clear, these aren't necessarily officially prohibited words, but they are words that folks are second guessing about whether or not they should include. I do think it's curious that woman women are on there, but man and men is not, right? So I'm like, oh, that's
Right.
great. So we're just going to erase woman or women. We can't use that word in a grant application or some kind of, report.
Mm-hmm.
But, we can
Mm-hmm.
put men and man as many times as we want.
Absolutely. Yes, my friend who is a biologist, that was the very first thing that she picked up on is like, Where did women go exactly? So, with that, I would strongly suggest people stop and take some time to reflect on how you're going to make these decisions. Because if you're looking for the one right decision, we don't have it, and I don't think anyone does. But just to think about how even more intentional you will need to be based on the mission of your organization and based on your larger point. There are some projects where I'm intentionally using words that have been frowned upon to make points, and then others where I am subbing out where I can. But then there are many words that cannot be subbed out, which I appreciate as well. So, Lisa, I'm glad that we brought this up because this is a very real concept for a lot of people. Very real.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, well, let's get into phase one. So, Lisa, and I have shared with you how many times I've told people that, hey, those of us here in the DMV area, DC is not just the Smithsonian and the Monument and Congress. There are people that live and work here every day. This is our home. This is literally where we reside and make memories for bad. This is our experience. And so, given that, it is also our experience that we are in real time witnessing what the rest of the world is watching on their news outlet, which is this federal government employee purge. And so, by the numbers around mid-February or so, this is where it gets interesting, Lisa, because we know that there are about 30,000 people that accepted what I've been calling the fake severance package, because it's a severance package that has not been approved by Congress financially. But at the same time, we have lots of folks that were, I would suggest, illegally dismissed and then brought back once folks realized what they actually did in the government. I would suggest that veterans have been, it's almost like a double whammy for them, because Lisa, as you've probably heard, the VA itself has had some folks that were dismissed, in addition to the veterans themselves, who make up about 30% of our federal workforce, also being sent home. So given that, at the time that we're recording this conversation, Lisa, we're expecting more. We're expecting more staff reduction at the VA, many of whom are veterans themselves. So, Lisa, how do we respond to this in real time?
Yeah. Just a quick clarification there at the beginning. You had said 30,000 people had accepted that non-severance package. It's actually 75,000 people.
Oh, God, even worse.
Plus an additional 30,000 that had been fired. So it was over 100,000 mid-Feb, right? So we're beyond that now.
Yeah, we're
although
gone.
the numbers are squishy, I suppose, because there's several court cases
that's
bringing people back in. But the veterans thing, that hasn't, as of the time of this recording, like you said, that hasn't happened yet, but it's looking like over 80,000 people from the Veterans Administration might be losing their jobs. And when you think about the VA as being one of, if not the busiest healthcare organization in the United States, it provides
yes.
physical and mental health care to veterans, of which there are many. And there has been so much news for as long as I can remember living in this country, where veterans have had really awful experiences getting the care that they need, long wait times, been ignored, dismissed. They've tried to get out of providing care to veterans. And so you're trying to slash 80,000 people from that organization that provides this. I just do not see that there is a world where veterans healthcare is going to improve, right? When you are massively reducing the number of people who are going to be able to provide that care. And so the Inspector General of the VA, that was also fired, right, is quoted as saying in this article I read in the AP that that there's the expertise that exists in the VA is gone to a degree, because many of those leaders have been fired. and that what is going to happen is the VA is not going to perform as well for veterans, and veterans are going to get harmed because the folks won't be there, right? So the wait times will be longer, the expertise. And we're talking like nurses, doctors, therapists, psychiatrists. Like we're talking medical and mental health providers who will no longer be able to serve this population.
And let's be clear, Lisa, we're not talking about a highly functional organization that's getting
No,
worse.
no.
We're talking about an organization that is already poorly performing and
Mm-hmm.
also decentralized, depending on where you are. And so given that, that makes a very hard thing harder for veterans. And so given that, the wait time on, for example, prescription medication being refilled. I have someone that's very close to me right now that used their benefits to go back to school and started back in July of 2024, requested, for example, hardware and so forth and other things that they had a right to have through their benefits in June to prepare to start school in July. And let's just say it's first quarter that you all are hearing this podcast and that person still has not received what they needed. And their academic program is almost over at this point. And I won't even get into the other medical stuff. And so given that, I know that the wait times are going to take longer. I know that some of the relationships that people have built, especially when it comes to mental health and mental health professionals, where one builds a relationship with the provider, that will have to start over for many people
Yep,
if they go
yep.
back at all. And so, I just find it very laughable, not the veterans themselves, but laughable at the arrogance that one would
Mm-hmm.
think they would know as a person that has not served their country to determine what veterans need and what they don't need.
Right, right.
That is laughable that you would have the lack of cultural humility to understand veterans' lived experiences. And so let's just slash for the sake of trimming the fat of government and see what happens.
Yeah,
Shameful. Shameful.
yeah. And this connects into the larger issue of the slashing of the quote unquote bloat in federal
Mm-hmm.
government. And I'm fundamentally opposed to this narrative that is being put forth that there is this fraud, waste, and abuse at such a degree that
Mm.
the federal government is so overblown and needs to be scaled back to reduce that fraud, waste, and abuse. There is certainly some of that, as there is in any large organization, but that's what the inspector generals were for, and you fired them all. So
That's right. Mm-hmm.
um, I think some interesting facts here, which I like to share with people who say that, the federal workforce does need to be reduced. I'm in agreement with that. I just don't like the way it's being done. Right. But I don't think the federal
Mm.
workforce needs to be reduced. Right. Because it assumes that the problems with efficiency are with the employees rather than with the systems and the regulations
Hello.
and the rules that have been set up. And so you could
Mm-hmm.
refine those, right? You could remove a lot of barriers by just looking at that and not
Mm-hmm.
removing people. And from what
Right.
I understand, doing a little bit of research and digging into this, is that the federal workforce is roughly the same size now as it was in 1960, or sorry, in 1980. But the US population is much, much bigger, right? So the federal workforce itself has
Yes.
actually, in kind of raw numbers, stayed pretty static, even as the United
Mm-hmm.
States population has grown. And it
Mm-hmm.
only makes up 1.87 of the entire civilian workforce if you remove active
Mm-hmm.
military from that, right? So a couple of million workers, excluding the post office, because they're a little different, the post office.
Yeah, yeah.
But to say that it's bloated and there's too many people and
How
that
do
to
you know
reduce
that?
the workforce will make it more
Mm.
efficient is just nonsensical. Do you really think the IRS that has struggled to maintain full staffing for decades is
Oh,
going
yeah.
to run better if you remove half its staff in tax season? good luck getting your refund check, folks. That's going to take 9 months to come through. Like, it's just absolutely mind blowing, right? Mind blowing.
Well, it's not blind, it's not mind-blowing to people who know that they want to privatize as much as possible. So
Right,
let's
right.
cut things so that we can shift it into our own hands. So that's the whole point. So once you
Yeah.
get rid of the inspector generals who are they're the ones that watch over the hen house, if you will, to make sure that no foxes get in. And so once you get rid of that
Mm-hmm.
gatekeeper, then the gate is wide open. And so this makes sense to people who want to privatize, and it makes sense when it comes to fascism. It does not make sense when it comes to democracy. So I'm always, unfortunately, mind bending in such a way to try to understand the nonsensical, but it clearly makes sense to certain folks. And
Mm-hmm.
what's interesting to me with these slashes is that, isn't it interesting, Lisa, how we start slashing things until you really find out what they do, right? So like even
Right.
going back
Right.
to Noah, for example, it's like, wait a minute. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you saw that kind of analogy that was said, but it was basically the thought was, why do we need Noah? All I need to do is look at my phone and I can tell what the weather is. And people are like, you idiots. Do you
Mm,
not know that the phones get the information from
right.
Noah directly? So it's almost like Lisa and I, we are going to the grocery store and we say, you know what? We don't need farms because all we need to do is go to the grocery store to get our
Right.
food.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a great way to put
Like,
it.
where do you think the food comes from? I'm from the country, I'm from the South. I know exactly where it comes from.
Yeah.
And so, given that, again, the lack of systems thinking is mind boggling.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, very similar to the pandemic, I can see the number of lives lost already,
Yeah.
just the ticker tape
Yeah.
of them. Um, and it's going to be unfortunate until and unless there is more and more resistance, because that's one thing that I've been heartened to see is how much resistance is actually playing out, where people are saying, no, we're not going to stand for certain things. And so for those that have the energy and the resources to be the resistance, do it. But a lot of these decisions are being made um, in ways very similar to our concept of the week, where there are broad sweeping implications that folks aren't aware of until
Yep. Yep.
it comes home to roost, if you will. So
Mm-hmm.
oh, anyway, but yes, it's ridiculous. And for those, I'm personally not expecting a tax refund, y'all. But for those who are, because I don't think I've ever gotten one in the state of Maryland, federally or state. But if you're expecting one,
Yeah.
pack your patience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Let's move on to phase two here. So kind of connected to your point about resistance, there's been a lot of discussion about where the heck are the Democrats, right? I've been getting texts from my British friends and family about where the heck are the Democrats. They might be using stronger words than heck, but there's been multiple think pieces in various newspapers and magazines and on the TV and such, right? Like this kind of disoriented disarray, like the holding the little paddles up at the not state of the union, and the ways in which there just doesn't seem to be any cohesive or coordinated response, or indeed any leader or leaders that are really coming forward in any kind of real powerful way. And so I listened to a podcast that is a podcast co-hosted by a BBC news reporter and an American commentator, and they were talking about um, that the Democrats need to give up the quote unquote woke. Um, I don't think they said ideology, but the ways in which that the Democratic Party is focused too much on woke things, and they need to move back to kitchen table issues. And they did nuance it a little bit. It wasn't that limited in its perspective. And just as a side note, if you're interested in learning more about woke, what it means, where it came from, Shaunna and I did have a discussion about this on episode 139 called Wake Up, Stay Woke. So you can access that, and we'll drop that in the show notes too. But my question I wanted to talk to you here about, Shaunna, is this kitchen table issue concept, right? It's not new to 2024, 2025. I mean, we hear it a lot that politicians need to focus on or get back to kitchen table issues. And what landed for me when these folks were talking was the desire or thought that the Democrats need to replace woke with kitchen table issues, as though these two things don't go hand in hand. So when I'm thinking about kitchen table issues, what I understand that to mean is economics, family economics, jobs, cost of living, grocery prices, things that kind of impact people's day-to-day living, right? So I thought to myself, well, for people of color in the United States, that's racism, right? So I was wanted to talk to you about that and hear your perspective on it, because I think the way that kitchen table issues are framed is they are framed in a like race neutral way, as but it really is white people, right? Because white people don't think about the way that racism impacts their income or their access to public spaces or their access to government, right? Whereas presumably folks of color are thinking about that every day and are having those conversations at the physical kitchen table. So I don't know what your thoughts are there on how that avenue misses the everyday experience of a significant portion of the United States.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I would completely agree with what you mentioned around kitchen table issues of lots of different identity groups that they have to think about on a regular basis, even before this extremely volatile presidential administration, where if you are a same-sex couple and family, you have to think about specific things that are your kitchen table issues, like safety, like education, like religion, like access to everything in regards to gainful employment without being harassed and bullied and so forth. That would be a kitchen table for those identities. Same thing in Black households. Even if you don't say the word Black or African American, there are understandings that are talked about on a regular basis around what you can and cannot do, what you should and should not do, what you have access to and what you don't have access to, what you do have access to, and what may take more effort to have access to in comparison to other groups. This is all common conversation. Even if you did not want to change the lived realities of those groups, it is still the day-to-day understanding of how do we discuss at the kitchen table navigating such issues, right?
Right.
And so given that, I had a kitchen table issue conversation with the boys at breakfast a couple of days ago, where I was specifically about high schools that they would like to go to, because here in Maryland and other areas, you have to apply to certain ones. If not, you stay on your regular trajectory, et cetera. And then what that means for college and so forth. And so I have to have the kitchen table issue conversation to say, all right, boys, it was already very difficult to access higher education, especially for your talents to be appreciated with a check so that you don't come out of school with a lot of debt. And now we also don't have affirmative action. So now what's going to be our avenue? And that is a everyday real conversation for my rising ninth grader and my rising sixth grader.
Yeah.
Every week. And so given that, what does that mean? And so I do think I want to say whitewashing in this particular concept, but I don't want people to think that I'm only saying it by race. Washing, whatever washing it is, whitewashing, rainbow washing, whatever it may be, there is a lack of complexity around that kitchen table issue phrasing. And I appreciate what they're trying to do. They're trying to make it applicable to the day-to-day lives of people, but those people that they're speaking to happen to be white folks sitting at a white kitchen table. When you explain the concept to me, I'm thinking, oh, they're talking about white folks' kitchen table. They're not talking about mine. They're not talking about many of the people that I love and care about. They're talking about white folks' kitchen table issues, not many different
Yeah.
kitchen table issues.
And it's, I mean, Katie Britt, who's a Republican senator from a southern state, I forget which one, she gave the response to President Obama's last State of the Union, and she got made fun of because she was literally sitting at a kitchen table and talking about real kitchen table issues that affect everyday people's lives, as a mom, as a wife, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, I actually think she took the being made fun of in stride. Actually, I was quite impressed with that. But I think, this, I don't disagree that economic issues are where perhaps we should, as the Democratic Party, I say we, I'm not really a member of the Democratic Party, but they should be spending more of their time.
Right.
But to do that absence and intersectional analysis is the problem, right? And so this gets back into like what we talked about in phase one, is this, because the term woke has become somewhat poison, right? Like intentional, it has been intentionally poisoned by the right, but that is the reality. All people react in a kind of, not all people, a lot of people, regardless of their identities, react negatively to the term woke now. But how do you have a real conversation around the economy, food prices, house prices, gas prices, without also acknowledging that different people for different reasons have different access to wealth and affordability, right? It's a disingenuous position to believe that the economy exists outside of race or gender or sexual orientation or ability, right? Like that's just not true, because my earning power as a white woman is different to your earning power as a Black woman. Our earning power is different to a man's earning power, right? So you can't disentangle it, which goes back to your point right at the beginning around all of those words, is that our diversity, equity, and inclusion, or wokeness, is everywhere. It is integrated into everything. And so if you take it out, then you are erasing the experience, the everyday kitchen table experience of a significant number of people in the United States, right?
Yes.
So
this collective denial.
Yeah.
It's this collective, the oversimplification turns into this collective denial that still doesn't address the main issues.
Right.
So let's ignore the complexity. Let's simplify it, because simplifying it helps us to make sure that we don't get into those more complex and uncomfortable conversations and issues. And so that's when we get into this denial.
Yeah. I like the way you frame that, the simplification of it. So by calling all of these kind of everyday issues kitchen table issues is an oversimplification, but it is in the using the example of race, it is whitewashing, because
yes
white people don't have to think about the complexity of the kitchen table issues in the same way, right?
Well, and that's where I think we miss an opportunity, because we miss an opportunity. So for example, we just finished talking about, the slashing of government workers and so forth, and, the employer-employee relationships in the government, and further, the common kernel of the conversation is gainful employment.
Right.
And that gainful employment affects people exponentially in different ways. So we all can talk about the kitchen table topic of gainful employment, but nobody wants to talk about how it affects Lisa, let's say 10 degrees differently from a white man. It affects Shaunna 50 degrees differently from a white man. It affects a person of color who's an immigrant 80 degrees differently, but it still affects all of us in a variety of ways that we don't want to talk about. Then we get to just oversimplify.
Yeah.
which goes
Yeah.
back to what we've also talked about in regard to critical thinking,
Mm-hmm.
systems thinking, and anti-intellectualism in this country. We don't want people to think too hard.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess for listeners, when you hear things like, we need to get back to the economy, we need to get back to kitchen table
Yes, yes,
issues,
yes,
ask
yes.
the questions, recognize
Mhm.
that they are not race or gender neutral concepts, right?
That's right.
Because they
That's
they
right.
land differently, and those kitchen table discussions look
Hmm.
different for different people. And if you are a politician and you're ignoring that, then all you're doing is centering whiteness and maleness and
Hmm.
able-bodiedness and straightness, right? Like that's, you're
Hmm.
doing it without doing it.
That's right.
Anyway,
That's
anyway.
right. Absolutely. Oh, so what are we? I feel like we're like on the edge of a podcast name, like paint the table white or something. I don't know. It's just it like the first thing I thought about was a white table. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, go back to that old episode 139 to get into the wokeness of things, but we want you to think in more complex ways when it comes to those day-to-day issues,
Mm-hmm.
depending on your identities. All right, so let's get into phase three. And Lisa, this gets to our old stomping grounds of higher
Mm-hmm.
education, which we've talked
Sure
about
does.
many, many times. And so
Yep.
I don't know about you, Lisa, and your doctoral program, but I remember an entire class where we sat down and reviewed a long history of dear colleague letters. And at that point, we're thinking Title IX, lots of different things that are in the history of higher education and education broadly in this country. But now when the dear colleague letters are happening in very real time, it's hitting very differently for me. And
Mm-hmm.
so on Valentine's Day, no doubt, February 14th, Department of Education, uh, Office of Civil Rights sent a letter to all colleges and universities that really boiled things down to quote, because of the Supreme Court's 2023 decision striking down affirmative action, any considerations of race, not just in admissions, but in hiring, scholarships, support, and all other aspects of student academic and campus life is now illegal. Oh, this letter, which is already a huge pendulum swing,
Mm-hmm.
especially
Mm-hmm.
for many campuses that have spent decades on this work, they now have to reverse decades of work
Yep.
in 2 weeks of compliance. And Lisa, let me just tell you, if I'd been in any role that I've held in higher education from the
Mm-hmm.
beginning of my career to the end, this would be my direct work right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, given that, I think what's interesting is that, again, the scramble. I'm thinking about general counsel's office scrambling. I'm
Mm-hmm.
thinking about folks that were in my roles and responsibilities, whether you're a chief diversity officer of a campus or you're the director of inclusion, excellence, whatever, what have you, even down to human resources, you're going to have some very hard conversations about this dear colleague letter because it's not a law. And it's not a regulation, but it's an interpretation. And so, Lisa, what do you do when your campus community interprets the law very differently?
Mm-hmm.
And very, like we were saying before, are you tightly coupled or are you loosely coupled with the law? I would suggest that
Right.
after affirmative action, many campuses, especially the ones I've worked on, were loosely coupled with the law, still compliant, but loosely coupled. And so gird your loins, general counsels, because you are going to earn more money than any campus can afford to pay you right now because your interpretation is being challenged.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you out of the what, six colleges and universities that I've worked at in my career, three of them are on the list for investigation around this dear colleague letter,
Mm.
including a major strategic plan that I assisted with organizing, writing, drafting, and presenting to a very, very large campus community. And so now people have to make some very hard decisions. And Lisa, I would suggest based on my career, I've said it for decades now. There will be, and frankly, there should be times where campus communities, especially presidents, get to be clear on what their stance is, and it's called courage. And if you're
Mm.
not ready to be courageous now, because I've seen others that have never been courageous, they've been very comfortable. They are uncomfortable now. And so we are going to see who is really supportive of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and who, as you say, bends a knee to this interpretation, whether they agree with it or not. Takes courage. But
Yeah. Mm.
how did the letter land on you, Lisa?
Well, it's such an overreach, right? Because the Supreme Court case that struck down affirmative action was about admissions. And they're making the argument
There you
that that
go.
extends to all aspects of campus life. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think it becomes really challenging to understand. I mean, the American Council on Education is saying if you were, you know, compliant before the Trump administration with the law, then you are still compliant with the law. But
Mm-hmm.
I understand why universities might be nervous, especially with,
Mm-hmm.
last month, Columbia getting $400 million of grants taken away, albeit I think that was an illegal
Yeah.
takeaway, but still
And
the law.
Hopkins as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
Johns
Yeah.
Hopkins University here in Baltimore as well. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I've been on the other side of a Dear Colleague letter when I was working in higher ed and doing sexual violence prevention and response. And the Obama administration released their 2011 Dear Colleague letter that was a very long time coming. And I was deeply thankful for because it basically held colleges and universities accountable for the complete lack of support and response that they had been providing survivors of sexual violence on campus, right? But now I'm on the
Mm-hmm.
other side of a Dear Colleague letter where I just think it's an absolute disgrace. And part of the problem, I think, this Atlantic article that we'll link in the show notes was talking about is that for many college campuses, diversity, equity, and inclusion programming or programming to support racial minorities was all kind of half-assed and underfunded and a little bit lip
That's
service
right.
to begin with. So what
Mm-hmm.
is it that you're exactly asking colleges and universities to do when there wasn't a lot of substance there all the time anyway?
Anyway, that's right.
Right. And so then are you just going to change a name? Like a lot of campuses are shifting towards the term belonging.
Oh
Um,
yeah. Oh
but
yeah.
we don't know whether the term belonging is going to be like on the shit list at some point. And
Right, right.
then eventually this links back to the phase one with the staffing cuts. Okay. So the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights is not very big. And
Right.
some 1,500 odd people are getting cut from the Department of Education. So are they really going to have the um, capacity to
Yes. Yes.
investigate
Yes.
several
Yes.
thousand colleges and universities across the United States with any rigor, right? Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
are they going to go after that tiny little institution that's hidden in the middle of Iowa or something? Like, I have no idea, right?
Right, right,
But,
right,
but
right.
that's the risk, and it could be a very costly risk.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That's right.
so I mean, so what? I just don't. I guess I'm just as confused. Like, so what? So student groups that are designed for students of color on predominantly white campuses to assist with their feelings of safety and inclusion. Um, Greek letter organizations that are specific to
Yep.
particular
Mm-hmm.
racial identity groups.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm. All of
Graduation
which has happened,
receptions, right? Like,
all of which has happened already at our military academies. That's already
right.
happened at West Point, and it's already happened. And so, yes, they're far reaching. I even saw one campus community that canceled in the middle of March, canceled their Women's History Month programming during the month.
Yeah.
I'm like, what? Excuse me? Yeah, yeah. It's an overreach for sure. An
Yeah.
overreach.
Like, so,
And
yeah.
it takes courage not to allow the overreach.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's going to be a lot of courage, quite honestly. I mean,
Hello. Mm-hmm.
like I'm thinking about, Colorado
Mm-hmm.
State University, where I did my graduate program. They have a Black student services, Native American student services, Latinx student services, right? Like, so a
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
women's center, and you ran a multicultural center, right?
Yes, I did. Yes,
Years gone
twice.
by.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so
Mm-hmm.
they all have to go per this Dear Colleague letter, like
Mm-hmm.
and it's not that a white student couldn't roll into Black student services and hang out there or go to the events. Like, it's not
Exactly.
prohibited, but
Right.
they're not going to, are they? Right?
Well, and that's the whole thing is that, I wonder if there's going to be once again a shift in language. So for example, there's a number of campuses that I know of that there's a huge difference in what these quote unquote centers do. But the
Mm-hmm.
ones that I can think about that might be the most protected, and that's not saying a lot, would be fill in the blank cultural centers because
Mm,
it's academic endeavor. And similar to Georgetown's point of view around we do have academic freedom, those centers may have more of a chance than Black student associations
right.
or
Right.
other quote unquote Black social organizations or Latinx social organizations or women's organizations, because it's about the academic endeavor of the identity rather than I'm supporting this
Yeah.
group of students and this group
Okay.
of faculty staff. And so with that, that's what's going to be interesting. So for example, my previous centers, so for example, at University of Maryland, I was responsible for the Office of Multi-Ethnic Student Education that was specifically for tutoring and other academic support programs that serve all students. Nobody's going to be turned away, like you said, Lisa.
Mm-hmm.
However, it happens to be at that time about 80% of the students that walked in the door are Black, brown, women, immigrant, et cetera. Then that may be okay. But the Black Cultural Center, if it does not have an academic focus or endeavor and it's primarily social and programmatic, I'd be even more shaky
Yeah.
because it doesn't necessarily have a direct academic endeavor.
Yeah.
It has a social and psychosocial endeavor. So
Yeah.
yeah, I know I'm
It's,
splitting hairs here, but yeah,
but that's what's going to happen. That splitting of hairs is what's going to have to happen. And I just feel like
that's right.
the whole process leaves a bad taste in my mouth in the sense that there is this co-optation by white people, predominantly white men, of civil rights laws, constitutional
Mm-hmm.
amendments, policies that are designed to rectify generations of exclusion for folks of color, people with disabilities, women,
Generations. Yes, yes, yes.
um, and
Mm-hmm.
twisting that to then say programs or policies that are supporting these groups who have historically been marginalized from these spaces are actually discriminatory against white men or straight people or able-bodied people,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
whole, and they're using the Office of Civil Rights to do this,
Exactly.
to
Exactly.
to protect white people, white men, straight people, able-bodied people from discrimination. Like you are not being
Mm-hmm.
discriminated against. Like it's such a disgusting turning inside out of the original intention of which is
That's right.
really well documented,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Like
Oh yeah.
like
Absolutely.
President Johnson, when talking about the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Acts of 64 and 65, right? It's in his
Mm-hmm.
speech about it, right? The documentation of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. It's in all of the historical documentation that it is race conscious stuff to
That's
address
right.
the
That's right.
disproportionate experience. And that
That's
is
right.
what, and so I find that to be just, this
Sick.
whole,
Sick.
it's sick. Yeah.
It's
It's just,
sick.
it's
And
warped. Yeah.
it goes back to what, in my opinion, at least this is on brand with affirmative action's opinion to begin with, in
Right.
regard to completely disregarding the history that was not equitable and the history where many groups have to catch up.
Yeah.
It's disregard because if you read Justice Roberts' opinion, it made the assumption that everyone's starting from the same
Yes.
starting line for the race,
Right, which is a
when
problem. Yeah.
actually they were not, and we
No.
are not. And so now we're extending that to every aspect of education to say, if you read Justice Roberts' opinion, you would think this would be the ideal. If the transatlantic slave trade didn't happen, if all forms of oppression didn't happen, then this would make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But it did happen. And so
Yeah.
since it did happen, we aren't starting from the same starting point. And so now here we are. And so this denial, and once again, rewriting, excluding full history, this is now making sense to them. Why do you need extra this when we're all starting from the same place? They're in denial that we're
Yeah.
starting from different places.
Oh, and I don't know that
Frustrating.
it's denial. I think it's like a willfully ignoring or forgetting that piece of information, right? But yeah, like in a bubble, abstract, any history whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, we shouldn't make decisions around race or gender, but we do not live
Mm-hmm.
in a bubble that is disconnected or
Mm-hmm.
ahistorical, right? Like that's
That's
just
right.
ludicrous.
That's right. That's right.
Anyway, so I
Exactly.
think I'm pretty annoyed at that letter. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out, Shaunna, and whether
Yeah. Yeah.
presidential courage, college presidential courage, is on display. And I am not feeling too confident
Oh,
about that at this point.
no, 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 not at all. Not feeling confident. And so we're going to see. Of course, my heart is sitting back watching the HBCUs and HSI specifically, along with Greek life, because I have some direct ties to those groups, obviously. But yeah, let's see. What's the courage ratio of these college and university presidents here?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
All right. Well, look, that's a wrap for this week. Dr. Lisa, I try so hard to help us end on an uptick, but this week, I don't know if it happened or not.
Nope.
What I will say though, let's invite people, Lisa, if there are college and university presidents that are fighting the good fight, they have a backbone and they are speaking with courage to these particular topics, let us know. We don't care the size, large or small type of
Mm-hmm.
institution. Lisa and
Yeah.
I have a big heart for higher education. So if you know of and have heard of some of those courageous stories, let us know about them. Okay. Let us know. So you can find us on YouTube at Unfazed Unedited with the brackets around you can find us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, Instagram at Unfazed Pod, LinkedIn also at Unfazed Pod. And you can email us about those college and university presidents at info@unfazedpodcast.com. Of course, we have our website, unfazedpodcast.com, where you can access both the old archived shows and the new shows. And we're still pressing forward, getting close to 200. So y'all have a lot of digging around to do there. But if you like this week's episode, like, subscribe, leave a review, share with your friends, coworkers, or others in this phase of your life. So Dr. Lisa, until next week.
Until next week. See ya.